In the past couple of videos, I have been talking about plagiarism, types of plagiarism, and ways to avoid it. And most recently, I went over some plagiarism checking software. If you have not watched these videos, I highly recommend checking them out. I left the links to these videos in the description section. Today, we are going to focus on some practical habits you can teach yourself to avoid obstacles around plagiarism. The most common way of using a reliable source in your own writing without committing plagiarism is to paraphrase. However, proper paraphrasing isn't just about rearranging the construction of the sentence, omitting a word or two, or changing a word to something synonymous. Proper paraphrasing can be tricky, and you have to do it in a way that preserves the original author's message and context. So today's video is all about paraphrasing. Paraphrasing is very useful writing skill, but it takes practice. Before you can practice though, you need to know the basic steps. Here are my 6 basic steps for paraphrasing properly. Let's get started. The first step I want to talk about involves understanding the message and context. Understand the passage fully. To do this, you need to read the passage at least a few times to let it sink in. Reading it over once or twice will not help you fully comprehend the author's message. You have to carefully go through the passage to get a full understanding and a feel for the author's intention. This will help you paraphrase more effectively and accurately. Based on my experience as a professor, I have seen several students who end up committing plagiarism because they didn't understand the original author's message. Because they couldn't comprehend the message, they just replaced a few words with synonymous words. To avoid this kind of mistake, full understanding of the message and context is a prerequisite of paraphrasing properly. The second step I want to mention is jot down key points. Once you fully understand the passage, take a fresh piece of paper and write down the key points you want to focus on. These are the points you want to include in your paper and subsequently paraphrase correctly. The next step I want to cover is draft your version. After jotting down your key points, draft your version of the passage. Do this without looking at the original passage. Base your version completely on what you understood. This will help you gauge if you fully understood the passage. The next step is compare your version to the original. This might be an intimidating process in the beginning, but with practice, it will become second nature. When you finish drafting your version, compare it to the original author's passage. Ask yourself the following questions. Does it read the same? Did I use the same words? Is the sentence construction too similar? Was I able to retain the exact context and message of the author? If your version is too similar, make revisions in areas where it is most appropriate. The next step I want to talk about is use direct quotation. Use a direct quotation if the terms and situation call for it. If there are terms or phrases that you really cannot replace without changing the context of the passage, put them in quotation marks. Some authors coin their own terms and phrases, and you really cannot replace those, especially if they are used for specific ideas that author themselves created. This technically does not qualify as paraphrasing, but there are definitely some situations when direct quotations cannot be avoided. The last step I want to introduce is note your sources. Even if you are able to properly paraphrase, you still need to give credit where it is due. It is important to give proper citation for direct quotations and any ideas you borrowed. Keep a note of your sources so it will be easy for you to cite them when you decide to include them in your paper. In most cases, you have to include your references at the end of the paper. In a summary, here are the 6 steps to follow paraphrase effectively. Step number 1, understand the passage fully. Step number 2, jot down key points. Step number 3, draft your version. Number 4, compare your version to the original. Step number 5, use direct quotation. Step number 6, note your sources. In my next video, I will talk about some practical tips and tricks you can use to paraphrase more effectively with the aim of avoiding plagiarism. Thank you so much for watching and see you in my next video.